Hey kiddos, hope you all had a great day. Hope you're enjoying our story time. Change that a little bit. That might be a little better. We're going to continue reading My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, and as you can see, we're getting close to the end. So let's just jump right into it. You know what? I'm going to take this off. I just turned the air conditioner off because it's a little loud. But it's really hot. When I came in here and turned the AC on about a couple hours ago, so we could cool this little room off, I've got this temperature gun that uses a little deal here. You just shoot something and it'll tell you what the temperature of it is. It was 110 degrees in the shade. It just went and hit something in the shade. 110 degrees. In the sun, I stood in the sun for a minute and just shot my arm, just like the sleeve on my arm, 135. It's a hot day out here. So I just turned the AC off, so it's going to warm up now, but we'll be alright. So this chapter is called In Which I Learn About Birds and People. And it's kind of a long chapter. So, goodness. I'll probably read half of it and then take a break. And if you guys want to finish the second half tonight, that's fine. If you wait till tomorrow, then that's fine too. Okay. Frightful and I settled down to living in snow. We went to bed early, slept late, and ate the mountain harvest, and explored the country alone. Oh, the deer walked with us. The foxes followed in our footsteps. The winter birds flew over our heads, but mostly we were alone in the white wilderness. It was nice. It was very, very nice. My deer-skinned, rabbit-lined suit was so warm that even when my breath froze in my nostrils, my body was snug and comfortable. Frightful fluffed on the coldest days, but a good flight into the air around the mountain would warm her, and she would come back to my fist with a thump and a flip. This was her signal of good spirits. I did not become lonely. Many times during the summer, I had thought of the long winter months ahead with some fear. I had read so much about the loneliness of the farmer, the trapper, the woodsman during the bleakness of winter that I had come to believe it. The winter was as exciting as the summer, maybe more so. The birds were magnificent and almost tame. They talked to each other, warned each other, fought for food, for kingship, for the right to make the most noise. Sometimes I would sit in my doorway, which became an entrance to behold a portico of pure white snow, adorned with snowmen, and watch them with endless interest. They reminded me of 3rd Avenue, and I gave them names that seemed to fit. There was Mr. Brackett. He lived on the first floor of our apartment house, and no one could sit on his step or even make a noise near his door without being chased. Mr. Brackett the chickadee spent most of his time chasing the young chickadees through the woods. Only his mate could share his favorite perches and feeding places. Then there were Mrs. O'Brien, Mrs. Calloway, and Mrs. Frederio. On 3rd Avenue, they would all go off to market together first thing in the morning, talking and pushing and stopping to lecture to children in the gutters and streets. Mrs. Frederio always found Mrs. O'Brien, or followed Mrs. O'Brien, and Mrs. O'Brien always followed Mrs. Calloway, in talking and pushing and even buying an apple. And there they were again in my hemlock, 3 busy chickadees. They would flit and rush around and click and fly from one eating spot to another. They were noisy, scolding and busily following each other. All the other chickadees followed them, and they made their way only for Mr. Brackett. The chickadees, like the people on 3rd Avenue, had their favorite routes to and from the best food supplies. They each had their own resting perches, and each had a little shelter in a tree cavity to which they would fly when the day was over. They would chatter and call goodnight and make a big fuss before they parted, and then the forest would be as quiet as the apartment on 3rd Avenue when all the kids were off the streets, and all the parents had said their last words to each other, and everyone had gone to their own little hole. Sometimes when the wind howled and the snows blew, the chickadees would only be out for a few hours. Even Mr. Brackett, who had been elected by the chickadees to test whether or not it was too stormy for good hunting, would appear for a few hours and disappear. Sometimes I would find him just sitting quietly on a limb next to the bole of a tree, all fluffed up and doing nothing. There was no one who enjoyed doing nothing on a bad day more than Mr. Brackett of 3rd Avenue. Frightful, the two Mr. Bracketts and I shared this feeling. When the ice and sleet and snow drove down through the hemlocks, we all holed up. I looked at my calendar poll one day and realized that it was almost Christmas. Bando will come, I thought. I'll have to prepare a feast and make a present for him. I took stock of the frozen venison and decided that there were enough steaks for us to eat nothing but venison for a month. I scooped under the snow for tea-berry plants to boil down and pour over the snowballs for dessert. I checked my cache of wild onions to see if I had enough to make onion soup, and set aside some large, firm ground nuts for mashed potatoes. There were still piles of dog-tooth violet bulbs and Solomon's seal roots and a few dried apples. I cracked walnuts, hickory nuts, and beech nuts. Then began a pair of deer hide moccasins to be lined with rabbit fur for a present for Bando. I finished these before Christmas, so I started a hat of the same material. 2 days before Christmas, I began to wonder if Bando would come. He had forgotten, I was sure, or he was busy, I said, or he thought that I was no longer here and decided not to tramp out through the snows to find out. On Christmas Eve, Bando still had not arrived. I began to plan for a very small Christmas with Frightful. About 4:30 on Christmas Eve, I hung a small red cluster of tea berries on the deerskin door. I went in my tree room for a snack of beech nuts when I heard a faint "Hello!" from far down the mountain. I snuffed out my tallow candle, jumped into my coat and moccasins, and plunged out into the snow. Again a "Hello!" floated over the quiet snow. I took a bearing on the sound and bounced down the hill to meet Bando. I ran into him just as he turned up the valley to follow the stream bed. I was so glad to see him that I hugged him and pounded him on the back. "Never thought I'd make it," he said. "I walked all the way from the entrance of the state park. Pretty good, eh?" He smiled and slapped his tired legs. Then he grabbed my arm and with 3 quick pinches tested the meat on me. "You've been living well," he said. He looked closely at my face. "But you're going to need a shave in a year or 2. I thanked him, and we sprang up the mountain, cut across through the gorge, and home. "How's the Frightful?" he asked as soon as we were inside and the light was lit. I whistled. She jumped to my fist. He got bold and stroked her. "And the jam?" he asked. "Excellent, except the cracks are absorbent and are sopping up all the juice." "Well, I brought you more sugar. We'll try next year. Merry Christmas, Thoreau," he shouted, and looked about the room. "I see you have been busy. A blanket, new clothes, and an ingenious fireplace with a real chimney. And, say, you have silverware." He picked up the forks that I had carved. We ate smoked fish for dinner with boiled dogtooth violet bulbs. Walnuts dipped in jam were dessert. Bando was pleased with his jam. When we were done, Bando stretched out on my bed. He propped his feet up and lit his pipe. "And now, I have something to show you, he said. He reached in his coat pocket and took out a newspaper clipping. It was from a New York paper, and it read, "Wild boy suspected living off deer and nuts in wilderness of Catskills." I looked at Bando and leaned over to read the headline myself. "Have you been talking?" I asked. "Me? Don't be ridiculous. You have had several visitors other than me." "The fire warden! The old lady!" I cried out. "Now, Thoreau, this could only be a rumor. Just because it's in print doesn't mean it's true. Before you get excited, sit still and listen." He read, "Residents of Delhi in the Catskill Mountains report that a wild boy who lives off deer and nuts is hiding out in the mountains. Several hunters stated that this boy stole deer from them during the hunting season." "I did not!" I shouted. "I only took the ones they had wounded and couldn't find." Well, that's what they told their wives when they came home without their deer. Anyway, listen to this. This wild boy has been seen from time to time by Catskill residents, some of whom believe he is crazy. Well, that's a terrible thing to say. "Just awful," he stated. "Any normal red-blooded American boy wants to live in a treehouse and trap his own food. They just don't do it, that's all." "Read on," I said. "Officials say there is no evidence of any boy living alone in the mountains, and add that all abandoned houses and sheds are routinely checked for such events. Nevertheless, the residents are sure that such a boy exists." End story. "That's a lot of nonsense." I leaned back against the bedstead and smiled. "Ho ho, don't think that ends it," Bando said, and he reached in his pocket for another clipping. This one is dated December 5th. The other was November 23rd. Shall I read? Yes. "Old woman reports meeting wild boy while picking strawberries in Catskills." Mrs. Thomas Fielder, 97, resident of Delhi, New York, told this reporter that she met a wild boy on Bitter Mountain last June while gathering her annual strawberry jelly supply. She said the boy was brown-haired, dusty, and wandering aimlessly around the mountains. However, she added, he seemed to be in good flesh and happy. The old woman, a resident of the mountain resort town for 97 years, called this office to report her observation. Local residents report that Mrs. Fielder is a fine old member of the community who only occasionally sees imaginary things. Bando roared. I must say I was sweating, for I really did not expect this turn of events. "And now," went on Bando, "and now for the queen of the New York papers. This story was buried on page 19. No sensationalism for this paper. Boy reported living off land in Catskills. A young boy of 17 or 18 who left home with a group of Boy Scouts is reported to still be scouting in that area, according to the fire warden of Catskill Mountains. Evidence of someone living in the forest, a fireplace, soup bones, and cracked nuts was reported by Warden Jim Handy, who spent the night in the wilderness looking for the lad. Jim stated that the young man had apparently left the area as there was no evidence of his camp upon his second trip." "What second trip?" I asked. Bando puffed his pipe, looked at me wistfully, and said, "Are you ready to listen?" "Sure," I answered. "Well, here's the rest of it. There was no trace of his camp on his second trip, and the warden believes that the young man returned to his home at the end of the summer. You know, Thoreau, I could scarcely drag myself away from the newspapers to come up here. You make a marvelous story." I said, "Put more wood on the fire. It is Christmas. No one will be searching these mountains until May Day." Bando asked for the willow whistles. I got them for him. and after running the scale several times, he said, "Let us serenade the ingenuity of the American newspaperman. Let us serenade the conservationists who have protected the American wilderness, so that a boy can still be alone in a world full of millions of people." I thought that was suitable, and we played Holy Night. We tried the 12 Days of Christmas, but the whistles were too stiff and Bando was too tired. "Thoreau, my body needs rest. Let's give up," he said after 2 bad starts. I banked the fire and blew out the candles and slept in my clothes. It was Christmas when we awoke. Breakfast was light: acorn pancakes, jam, and sassafras tea. Bando went for a walk. I lit the fire in my fireplace and spent the morning creating a feast from the wilderness. I gave Bando his presents when he returned. He liked them. He was really pleased. I could tell by his eyebrows. They went up and down and in and out. Furthermore, I know he liked the presents because he wore them. The onion soup was about to be served when I heard a voice shouting in the distance. "I know you were there! I know you were there! Where are you?" And I think we'll stop there. We'll see who's coming to visit next time. Love you, kids. Have a good night. Bye-bye.